ever feel like power? Like it's this big thing, we talk about it constantly, but do we really get it?
Hmm.
That's what we're diving into today with Michel Foucault,
Yeah.
the philosopher who really digs into those power dynamics in ways, honestly, I think they might just blow your mind.
Yeah.
We've got this interview with him, and he jumps right in, like right off the bat, to how we misunderstand power.
And it's interesting, right? He uses the Gulag, the Soviet prison system, kind of as the starting point.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
It does.
Because you think Gulag, you think horrible place, system of control, oppression, all that. He's not obviously, celebrating that.
No.
What he's doing is he's actually taking apart this comparison that people make constantly, right?
Yes.
People use the Gulag as this like catch-all for
Right.
any kind of confinement.
Exactly, yeah.
My boss is like the Gulag,
The school's like a prison.
The school is like a prison, exactly.
Yeah. And I think what he's doing by really digging into that comparison is sort of highlighting this crucial point that, when we do that, when we just say everything is the Gulag, we kind of diminish the actual horror, the very real horror
Yes.
of what those systems actually were.
Yeah, it's like you're trivializing it in a way.
Exactly.
And at the same time, it's almost like you're using it as a distraction, because what you're not talking about are all the other ways in which power is working on us on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's like saying, oh, traffic is basically, a human rights violation.
Exactly.
It's just, it doesn't quite hold.
It doesn't hold.
And it makes us not pay attention to the more insidious ways in which we experience this on a daily basis.
It's those insidious, almost invisible ways that are more impactful, perhaps, in a way, because we don't see them coming.
Exactly. And that leads us to maybe what is one of the most powerful ideas that Foucault kind of puts out there, which is that power isn't just about saying no. It's not just about repression. It's about shaping.
Yes.
It's about shaping what we desire, who we are, what we believe to be true.
So here's where it gets really interesting for me. Okay, so he's saying it's not just some dude, like in a crown, on a throne, shouting commands.
Right.
It's more like, I don't know, like a sneaky algorithm, is it?
I would say it's more like kind of a network of influences that are constantly sort of shaping what it is that we desire, what it is that we believe.
Yes.
Think about, the way that social media impacts what we find attractive, what we think we should be buying, even who we think we should be.
Like instead of a king on a throne, it's more like, I don't know, like Instagram influencers telling us what to buy.
In a way, yes. But I think the point is that it's not always this kind of top-down structure.
Uh-huh.
Power is much more fluid. It's much more kind of, ingrained in the very fabric of the way that we interact, the institutions that we exist in.
It's a complete shift in perspective, isn't it?
It is.
Because we're so used to thinking, okay, somebody has power over me. They're the ones controlling me.
Yeah.
But Foucault's saying, hold on a second, you're playing a part in this too.
Exactly.
They're internalizing these expectations, these norms.
Exactly, yeah.
And they are shaping not just your actions, but they're shaping your desires, your very sense of self even.
Absolutely. And to get to that point, he introduces this idea of the plebs.
The plebs, yeah. This is the one where initially when I first heard it, I was like, what's he talking about? Is this like ancient Rome? Commoners? Like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, he's using plebs to mean something much broader than just a social class. He's using it to represent this constant underlying force of resistance that exists throughout history, this force that pushes back against control in all its forms.
So it's less about a specific group of people and more about this drive that humans have.
Yes.
To not be controlled.
Yes, to resist.
To resist, exactly.
And think about it. Throughout history, you see uprisings. You see revolutions, you see rebellions. And they're not always led by the most powerful, the most privileged.
Right.
Oftentimes, it's the everyday person. It's the person that seems to be powerless.
Yes.
That rises up and challenges the status quo. And that's the spirit that he's trying to capture with this idea of the plebs.
It's that moment when, regardless of your social standing, your economic background, people just say enough is enough.
Yes.
And they band together, and it's almost like the spontaneous combustion of we're not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. And that's a very different way of thinking about social change, isn't it?
It is.
It suggests that real transformation doesn't always come from the top down.
Right.
It often starts with the plebs, with that inherent desire, that human desire for autonomy, for freedom.
You know that saying, power concedes nothing without a demand?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's those unexpected places where those demands come from.
Absolutely. And that, in a way, I think connects to his point about the Gulag, right?
Yes, yes.
Because when we fixate on these large-scale systems,
Yeah.
we forget about those everyday forms of power
Yes.
that are actually what's shaping our lives.
Right.
And it's by understanding those and figuring out how to resist those that we can actually, I think, start to create real change, lasting change.
It's about those everyday rebellions.
Yeah.
It makes you think that, like, where do we actually see this, these, like, subtler forms of power? And then on top of that, like, how do we even begin to challenge them?
Well, I think, Foucault would say that one of the first things we have to do is we have to start to question some of these almost like classic power dynamics, right?
Yeah.
The things that we take for granted.
Okay.
And he specifically, critiques those analyses of power that focus only on the master and the slave.
Right, because you focus on that, you're missing all the nuance.
Exactly.
It's like trying to understand the internet by just looking at, like, the wires coming into your house,
Exactly. Foucault wants us to see that power isn't just about one person or one group dominating another.
Right.
It's so much more insidious than that, right?
Yeah.
It operates through all of these subtle mechanisms, and often with kind of the unwitting participation of the people who are being controlled.
So it's less about somebody, like, cracking a whip, and it's more about us internalizing these expectations, these societal norms, to the
Yes.
point where, we're almost policing ourselves and each other in a way.
Exactly. And remember what we were saying earlier about power shaping desires.
Yes.
This is where it gets really, really interesting, I think. Think about those times where you have felt pressured to conform to certain expectations.
Right.
Whether it's about, how you dress, what you say, the things you're supposed to be passionate about.
Like that pressure to fit in, to be normal, even if you don't see it, even if you don't realize that it's there.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like nobody's forcing you to, buy the latest smartphone.
Right.
But then you feel this weird, twinge of, I don't know, inadequacy if you don't have it.
Exactly. And that feeling, right, that sense of, oh, maybe I'm not good enough or whatever it is, that's power at work.
Wow.
It's not about someone literally forcing you to do something.
Yeah.
It's about shaping what it is that you want,
Yeah.
what you believe is acceptable, even desirable.
It's almost as if those desires, those beliefs, they become a sort of prison.
Yeah.
Even though, like, we feel like we've chosen them, you
Yeah.
know?
Yes. That's such a powerful way to put it. And it makes us really, it shows why Foucault is so skeptical of these simplistic narratives of liberation.
Right. So those moments in history you think about, like, throwing off the shackles, we use those phrases a lot.
Right.
Maybe it's not as simple as all that.
Exactly. And take the example of Philippe Pinel.
Okay.
This is the French physician who was really, hailed as a hero.
Right. He's the one who, like, took the chains off.
Exactly.
Advocated for more humane treatment.
Yes, in the asylums.
Yeah.
And so, at first glance, you look at it, you're like, oh, this is great. This is progress. This is, compassion. This is human rights.
It's like a victory. Right.
It seems like a clear victory.
Yeah.
But Foucault argues that, Pinel's reforms, while well-intentioned,
Okay.
they didn't actually dismantle those power structures.
Yes.
They just shifted them.
So you're saying instead of physical chains, it became something else? What, like?
Well, so, Pinel introduces this idea of what he calls the medical gaze,
Okay.
which is basically, now you have doctors, right, with
Right.
their specialized knowledge, and they become the ultimate authority in defining, sanity and madness.
I see.
So the patients are no longer physically restrained,
Yeah.
but now their behavior, their thoughts, their very identities are subject to this scrutiny, this control under this new medical paradigm.
So it's like you're not in chains anymore, but now you're constantly being analyzed,
Exactly.
observed, categorized according to all these standards that you may not even understand.
Precisely. And this is where I think Foucault's work gets really, really thought-provoking.
Mm.
Because he's not saying Pinel was wrong.
Yeah.
He wasn't, malicious in what he was doing.
Sure.
But he's showing that even in this, well-intentioned, seemingly progressive reform, we can inadvertently reinforce those power structures or create new ones.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
It's like just because something looks like progress on the surface doesn't mean that it's actually getting at the root of the problem.
Yeah.
In fact, it might just be power adapting. Finding new ways to assert itself.
Absolutely. And this is where his critique of transgression comes in.
Okay, so he's saying that, like, just breaking the rules, rebelling for the sake of it,
Yes.
might not be the revolutionary act that we think it is.
Exactly. In fact, he argues that oftentimes focusing only on those acts of transgression can actually serve to reinforce the power structures we're trying to dismantle.
How so? I would love to understand that a little bit more.
Well, think about it this way. Every time that we break a rule, we're still kind of implicitly acknowledging the legitimacy of that rule, of that system that created that rule. We're still playing by its terms, even if we're trying to disrupt it.
So it's not enough to just, break the rules. To be shocking, we need more than that if we really want to change things.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what's so interesting about Foucault's work, is that he kind of challenges us to think differently about what resistance looks like.
Okay.
He says that it's not just about, saying no to power, but it's about really understanding how power works and then finding those ways to kind of to subvert it from within.
Yeah.
To create, those cracks in the system.
So less about, like, storming the Bastille and more about, I don't know, becoming like invisible ninjas of dissent or something. I don't know if I'm cut out for that.
Well, think about it less like invisibility and more like, I don't know, strategic gardening.
Okay.
We have to kind of like understand the roots of these power structures, right? The way that they shape our lives in these often invisible ways. And then it's about how do we plant those seeds of change? How do we nurture different ways of being, different ways of relating to one another?
I like that analogy. Yeah, it's less about, like, brute force and more about cultivating those spaces, where those different values, different ways of seeing the world can actually take root.
Yes.
But how do we even begin to do that? You know what I mean? It's like he's not really giving us a step-by-step guidebook here, is he?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't really give us the answers. And I think, that's intentional.
Okay.
Because, he wants us to really engage in this process of questioning, of analysis, of critical thinking, rather than just sort of handing us, here's the answer. And remember, power itself is always, it's shifting, right?
Yes, it's adapting.
It's adapting. And so our strategies for how we resist also have to be flexible.
So it's less about finding the answer and more about just developing, I don't know, like the tools.
Yes.
To be able to analyze the power dynamics in our own lives and then figure out, okay, how do we challenge these?
Foucault, I think, would want us to all become sort of, as you said, archaeologists of power.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
To really examine all those things that seem so mundane in our lives.
Yes.
Our workplaces, our schools, our families, even, as we were talking about earlier, our own kind of internalized beliefs.
Yeah, those desires that we think are our own.
Exactly. And ask ourselves, okay, where is power operating here? Whose interests are being served? And how can we challenge that?
It's about waking up in a way, right? Like to these things that we don't even realize are happening. And then once we see them, it's like, okay, now what can we do?
Exactly. And that's, I think, why his work is still so relevant today.
Yes.
Decades after these ideas were written, we live in a world that's like saturated,
Oh, yeah, more than ever.
with information, with technology, with all these kind of, new and constantly evolving power structures.
Yeah, it's like it's more important than ever to understand these dynamics.
Exactly. And I think that by understanding how power works, by really developing these critical thinking skills, we can be much more conscious in how we participate in the world around us.
It's a call to action. To be more than just passive, like consumers of culture, of information, of whatever, the status quo.
Yeah.
He's challenging us to be active, to question everything,
Yeah.
and to never stop looking for those cracks in the system where we can do something. We can make a difference. Wow, that's a lot to think about.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Foucault, I'm curious, where do you see these dynamics at play in your own life? And what, even if it's a small act, what seed of change might you plant today?